My parents gave me up for adoption because I was a boy. Now, they've contacted me, requesting money to support my sister's education. In this emotional and raw video, I dive into the shocking revelation that my biological parents gave me up simply because I was a boy. After years of silence, they reached out to me with an unexpected request: help support their daughter's education. The betrayal, the anger, and the confusion that followed left me questioning everything. Why now? Why after all this time? Was this some twisted attempt at guilt, or did they really change? Watch as I share my decision and the consequences of cutting ties with the people who abandoned me. It was May 5, 2020, a warm Tuesday afternoon. I, Daniel, 26, was sitting in my apartment, staring at my laptop, scrolling through work emails, when I decided to take a break. The quiet buzz of my phone on the coffee table caught my attention, just another reminder of the everyday monotony. But my eyes kept drifting toward the closet across the room, where I knew a dusty old box sat, tucked away under piles of other forgotten things. The box had been there for as long as I could remember, stored away in the attic by my adopted parents. They had always been open with me about the fact that I wasn't their biological child. "You're our son, Daniel," my mom, Laura, would always say. "You were meant for us, no matter what." They had made sure I knew that being adopted didn't make me any less part of the family. But even with their constant reassurance, there was always a gnawing curiosity about my biological parents, who they were, why they gave me up. I had heard the basic story, how they were young, not ready for a child, and how it was an unfortunate situation. That's what they had always told me. That's what I had always believed. But that day in May, I decided to dive into the box. I figured I might find some old pictures or letters from my biological parents, something that would provide more context. What I found, however, would shatter everything I thought I knew about my past. I pulled out the first few pieces of paper, a few pictures of baby me, some letters from the adoption agency, and then, at the very bottom of the box, I found something that made my heart skip a beat. It was a folder marked with bold, red ink that read, "Adoption Finalization Documents." I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling. The first page was just the standard paperwork, but as I flipped through, a note caught my eye. It was a brief letter from the agency, something I had never seen before, dated a few months after my adoption. I skimmed through it, my mind still processing. But then, my eyes stopped on a line. Steve and Monica, after receiving their second daughter, had requested to adopt again, but only if the child was female. They were seeking a daughter and, after the birth of a son, decided that their family was complete with a second daughter, and thus their son was given up. My stomach dropped. The words didn't quite register at first, and I had to read it again. They didn't want me because I was a boy? They didn't want me because I wasn't the right gender? My mind began to race. I looked at the words again, and again, until the gravity of it hit me fully. It wasn't just that they weren't ready for a child, as I had always believed. They had specifically chosen not to raise me because of something so superficial, so irrelevant, because I wasn't the right gender. They had fulfilled their quota of boys, as the letter said. I felt sick. I felt everything at once: anger, disbelief, confusion, and the sharp sting of rejection. They hadn't wanted me because of something so trivial? Something I had no control over? My heart ached with the realization that I had been discarded like some object that no longer served a purpose. Not because they couldn't care for me, not because I was unwanted, but because they just wanted a daughter more than they wanted me. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream at the injustice of it all. But instead, I just sat there in silence, the weight of the paper in my hands growing heavier. I didn't know what to do, where to go from here. My entire understanding of my own adoption had been based on a lie, or at least on a version of the truth that felt much more comfortable. But this? This was the truth, as painful and raw as it was. I wasn't just given up, I was rejected for something I couldn't change. I sat there, staring at the paper, letting the truth sink in. The words were so blunt, so final, and I could barely breathe. What was I supposed to feel now? What was I supposed to do with this knowledge that had been hidden from me for so long? It was June 15, 2020, a Monday, and I was sitting in my small downtown apartment after another long day at work. The city was quiet for a summer evening, no street noise, no honking cars, just the dull hum of the air conditioning. It had been a few weeks since I discovered the truth about my biological parents, Steve and Monica. I had tried to push it all to the back of my mind. What was the point of thinking about them, right? After all, they gave me up when I was just a baby. What could I expect now? But on that particular Monday evening, everything was about to change. I was scrolling through my phone, half-heartedly checking emails when one subject line caught my eye: "We need your help." It was from an email address I didn't recognize, but when I saw the name, my heart skipped a beat: Steve and Monica. My biological parents. I stared at the screen for a few moments, processing the words. I hadn't heard from them in years, and I certainly didn't expect to hear from them now, not after everything that had happened. My mind raced. Why now? Why me? I clicked open the email, my fingers trembling as I did. The message was long, almost like a confession. They started by explaining how they had regretted their decision for years, but that it had taken them this long to come to terms with it. They told me they had been following my life from a distance. Creepy, right? They said that they'd been keeping tabs on me through social media, making sure I was doing okay. They were watching me all these years, yet had never once reached out. But now, in their time of need, they wanted to reconnect. I kept reading, trying to make sense of the words. At first, I was numb, but then the bombshell dropped. They explained that their daughter, my biological sister, Emily, was now of college age, and she had been accepted to a prestigious university. However, they had fallen on hard times, and could not afford the tuition. And that's when they asked me, their long-lost son, to help pay for her education. I felt like I had been hit with a ton of bricks. My breath caught in my chest, and I stared at the screen, dumbfounded. I read the words over and over again, trying to make sense of what I was reading. After all these years of silence, now they decided to contact me, asking for money? It didn't make any sense. They had given me up because I was a boy, and now they were asking me for help to support their daughter's future? The audacity, the selfishness of it all, made my stomach churn. They were reaching out because they were in need, because Emily was in need. What about me? What about the years I spent thinking I was unwanted, neglected, and abandoned? Did they think I'd forget everything? That I'd just open my wallet and offer them money after all this time? I could feel my blood boil as I processed their words. I was in shock, but anger bubbled up quickly. The message felt so calculated, so convenient, like they were trying to ease their guilt after abandoning me. They were trying to repair the damage they caused with a simple request: money. I sat there staring at the email, feeling torn. Part of me wanted to scream, to reply with something sharp and final, but another part of me, the part one was ashamed of, was curious. Was I really going to just ignore them? What kind of person would I be if I didn't at least hear them out? But another part of me, the logical part, screamed no. I couldn't process it. I didn't even know where to start. Why now? Why after all these years? Was this some twisted guilt trip, or were they truly desperate? Whatever their reasoning, I felt nothing but betrayal and resentment. I couldn't decide whether I wanted to yell at them or just shut the door on this whole painful chapter of my life once and for all. I took a deep breath, closed my laptop, and stared at the wall. I didn't know how to respond yet, but I did know one thing: this was far from over. It was June 16, 2020, just the day after I received the email. The sun was setting, casting a soft orange glow across my apartment, but I barely noticed. I sat on the couch, the email still open on my laptop, staring at it in disbelief. How could they even ask me for money? After all these years of silence, after everything that had happened, they were contacting me out of the blue, not to apologize, not to make amends, but to ask for financial help. The audacity was almost too much to process. The weight of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't just dismiss it. The words kept echoing in my mind, and I kept rereading the email over and over, trying to make sense of their request. But instead of processing their words, I found myself lost in a swirl of memories I hadn't thought about in years, memories from my childhood, from the day I first learned why my biological parents had given me up. I was around 10 years old when my adopted parents, Laura and Greg, decided it was time to tell me the full story. I had always known I was adopted, but they never went into the details. I think they were trying to protect me, to shield me from the truth. But that day, sitting in the kitchen with Laura, the truth was revealed. They gave you up because they wanted a perfect family, Laura had said, her voice gentle, but the words still stung. I didn't fully understand at the time, but the implications were clear. They didn't want me because I was a boy. I wasn't what they wanted, and so I had been discarded like an unwanted item. I still remember the look on her face as she told me, the sadness in her eyes. But it was nothing compared to what I felt inside. I remember feeling a deep ache in my chest. I wasn't rejected because of who I was, but because of what I was, a boy. I had learned to bury the hurt over the years, to accept the narrative that they weren't ready for me, that it was some sort of unfortunate mistake, but deep down, I knew the truth. The reason they gave me up was simple: they wanted a daughter, and I didn't fit into their plans. I hadn't thought about those feelings in years. But now, reading the email, it all came rushing back: the anger, the shame, the heartbreak. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. They had chosen not to raise me. They had actively rejected me. And now, after all this time, after all these years of being ignored, they were asking me to help their daughter, the one they had actually wanted. A daughter they had raised, loved, and cherished, while I was nothing more than a distant memory to them. The irony hit me hard. They had discarded me for no other reason than my gender. And now, they wanted my help. They wanted my money to help Emily, the child they had always wanted. It felt so unfair, so hypocritical. They were asking for a favor when they had never once even cared enough to get to know me. As I sat there in the dim light, my mind raced with emotions I couldn't control. A part of me wanted to scream at them, to lash out with all the hurt I had carried with me all these years. Another part of me wanted to shut the email down and never think about them again. But I knew I couldn't. Not after everything. I decided that I couldn't just ignore this. I had to respond. Not because I felt obligated, but because I had to make them understand. They needed to know the damage they had done, the pain they had caused by choosing their daughter over me. I had to stand up for myself, even if it meant cutting them off completely. I opened the email again, my hands shaking as I started to type my response. It was June 17, 2020, just a day after I had read Steve and Monica's email. I had barely slept the night before, the weight of their words still hanging heavily in my mind. As the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed answers, answers I wasn't sure I wanted, but answers nonetheless. I knew I couldn't just ignore this, not after everything. I had to confront them, even if it meant facing the years of hurt and rejection all over again. I picked up my phone just after lunch, my hand trembling slightly as I stared at Steve's number on the screen. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. What was I going to say? What could I even say to someone who had treated me like I didn't matter? I couldn't figure it out, but I knew one thing for sure: I needed to hear him explain it, even if I wasn't sure I could ever forgive him. The phone rang twice before he picked up. His voice, when it came through the line, was shaky, almost like he had been waiting for this call. "Daniel," Steve's voice cracked, "it's been so long. I'm so sorry. We've thought about you every day. You've been on our minds." I didn't let him finish. The anger that had been simmering inside me for years, the anger that I had buried so deep, erupted. "You're sorry?" I practically spat, my voice rising with every word. "You gave me away because I was a boy. How are you even trying to justify that now? You just gave me away. How could you think I'd just forget that?" I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the blood rushing to my head as I spoke. I was angry, no doubt, but there was something else there, too. Disbelief, maybe? Confusion? How could they be so casual about this? How could they ask me for money, after everything? And now, after all this time, you're asking for money to help your daughter? Do you even hear yourselves? How are you still trying to make this about you? I could feel the frustration building, the words tumbling out faster than I could control them. You don't get to act like everything's fine after all this time. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, so long that I thought Steve might have hung up. But then, his voice came back, quieter now. I know we messed up, Daniel. But please, don't hold it against us forever. We made a mistake, but Emily needs this. We need you. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The audacity of it all, the way he was still asking for help after everything they'd done. They had given me up. And now they were asking for my help. I didn't know how to respond. My mind was racing in every direction, like a million different thoughts were colliding inside me. Part of me was still seething with anger. Part of me wanted to scream at him, tell him how much he had destroyed my sense of self-worth, how I had lived my whole life with that hurt. But another part of me, a weaker part one hated, felt a strange twinge of sympathy. Emily was just a kid, right? She didn't have anything to do with what her parents had done to me. Maybe I could help her. Maybe I could help fix some small part of what they had broken in me. But no. I quickly pushed that thought down. I'll think about it, I said, my voice shaky. I couldn't trust myself to say anything else. My head was spinning, and my heart was pounding. The last thing I wanted to do was give them anything. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't just leave it like this. I needed space to think. But don't expect anything, I added, my tone flat, trying to reinforce the distance I knew I needed. Without waiting for a response, I hung up the phone. The line clicked in the quiet of the room. I felt a sense of emptiness wash over me. There was no relief, no sense of closure. Just a quiet resignation. I had asked for answers, and I had gotten them. But the answers didn't change anything. They didn't make the pain go away. They didn't undo the years of hurt. I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, my hands still trembling. I didn't know what the next step was. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to forgive them. But one thing was certain, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It was 10:15 p.m. on June 17, 2020. The world outside my apartment was quiet, bathed in the glow of streetlights, but inside, I sat at my desk, surrounded by the quiet hum of my thoughts. I had spent the last few hours replaying the phone call with Steve in my mind. The anger, the disbelief, the hurt, they all kept swirling around, mixing with something else, uncertainty. A part of me had wanted to be the bigger person. Part of me wanted to help Emily. But the other part, the part that had been hurt, rejected, and abandoned, refused to bend. I looked at my laptop screen, watching the blinking cursor as if it was taunting me, daring me to type. It felt like the hardest thing I had ever done. The decision had been made, but the action of putting it into words, sending it off into the ether, seemed like a final, irreversible step. The weight of it all hit me, and I wondered if I would regret this later. Would I regret not helping? Would I feel guilty forever for turning my back on them? I wanted to believe that I was making the right decision. I wanted to believe that I wasn't just being petty or bitter. But deep down, I knew that the real reason I couldn't help them wasn't because I didn't want to. It was because I couldn't trust them. I couldn't trust the people who had so easily let me go, who had chosen to ignore me for so many years, only to come crawling back when they needed something. It wasn't even about money, it was about the years of pain they had caused me. And now, after all this time, they wanted me to help them? I shook my head, clearing the thoughts away. I had already been abandoned once. I wasn't about to give them any more of myself. I wasn't going to allow their guilt and shame to weigh me down any further. I had my own life to figure out. I had spent so many years carrying their choices with me, but I was done. This was my decision. It had to be. Taking a deep breath, I opened a new email draft, the cursor blinking at me like a challenge. I began to type, the words coming out with a mixture of finality and emotion I couldn't quite control. Dear Steve and Monica. Thank you for reaching out. I've taken the time to think about your request, and after considering everything, I've made my decision. I cannot help with Emily's education. I have my own life to figure out, and I cannot keep carrying the weight of your choices. What you did to me, how you rejected me simply because of my gender, has affected me in ways I can't even explain. You gave me up without a second thought, and now you're asking me to fix things. But I can't. I've spent years building a life for myself, trying to move past what you did, and it hasn't been easy. I don't know if you can ever understand how deeply this has impacted me, but it's too late now to undo what was done. I am not angry, but I can't help you. I'm not the person you think I am. Please understand that this decision is not out of spite. It's simply the reality of what you've made me into, someone who has learned to live without you. Goodbye. Daniel. I stared at the email for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Was this harsh? Was I being too cold? Maybe. But it was the truth, and I had never been more sure of anything in my life. I had already given up a part of myself when they gave me away. I wasn't going to give up anymore. Not now, not ever. I clicked send. The instant I did, a strange calmness washed over me. The anxiety that had been building up in my chest for days disappeared. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel satisfaction. But I felt something closer to peace. I had made the decision for me. I had chosen myself, for the first time in a long time. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, and for the first time, I didn't wonder if I had made the right choice. I knew I had. It was 11:30 p.m., June 17, 2020, when I finally hit send. The sound of the click felt louder than anything I had ever heard before. The words I had written to Steve and Monica were out there now, floating in cyberspace, delivered with finality. But as soon as I pressed that button, something strange happened. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel satisfaction. Instead, I felt empty. Like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders but left an uncomfortable hollowness behind. The guilt crept in almost immediately, like an uninvited guest at a party. Was it the right decision? Had I done the right thing by turning them away after everything? Was I too harsh, too quick to sever the last tie I had to my biological family? These questions began to spiral in my mind, unanswered, leaving me feeling disoriented. I tried to distract myself, pulling up a random video on YouTube to kill the time. But I couldn't focus. I kept looking back at my phone, half expecting a reply, some kind of apology, some form of acknowledgement that what they had done was wrong, some shred of recognition that they understood why I couldn't help. But nothing came. My heart was beating faster now, my thoughts racing. What would my life have looked like if I had helped them? What would things have been like if I had swallowed my pride, if I had chosen to believe that they had truly changed? I had convinced myself that I wasn't the kind of person who would allow past hurts to cloud my future. But here I was, second-guessing myself, wondering if I had just turned my back on an opportunity to heal some old wounds. Had I been too quick to judge them? Had I shut the door before even considering if they deserved a chance? I couldn't answer those questions. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to. And that was the hardest part. That uncertainty gnawed at me as I sat on the couch, staring at the dark screen of my phone, waiting for something that would never come. I felt this strange mix of emotions, anger, confusion, and the worst of all, regret. Regret that I couldn't forgive them. Regret that I had closed the door on a possibility of rebuilding something, even if it was a small piece of a broken foundation. Could I have given them a chance? Maybe. But something inside me kept whispering that I was better off not taking that risk. That it was too late. That this was the only choice that could keep me from becoming a part of the same story they had written for me when I was a child, a story of rejection. But the silence after sending the email felt deafening. It felt like I had just burned the last bridge that connected me to them. This wasn't just an email. This was the final nail in the coffin of whatever relationship we could have had. A relationship that had been broken before I even understood what was happening. I started to think about how this decision would shape my future. Would I ever feel at peace with it? Or would this be the one thing that would haunt me for years to come? How could I have been so firm in my decision, yet so uncertain at the same time? The emotional toll was heavier than I had expected. As I lay down in bed that night, my mind wouldn't stop running through the same questions over and over. What if this was the wrong choice? What if, years from now, I looked back and regretted not giving them a chance to show they could change? But then, another thought crossed my mind. What if they never changed? What if, in giving them a second chance, I was only setting myself up for more pain? The weight of the unknown felt unbearable, but I knew one thing for sure, it was the end. This was the last connection we would ever have. And, in a strange way, it felt like a loss I had already prepared for, a loss that had been inevitable the moment they chose not to keep me. Maybe I would never know if I made the right choice, but I knew that, for my own peace of mind, this was the only choice I could make. As I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, I wondered if I would ever find the answers to the questions that haunted me. But for now, all I had was silence. The next few days passed in a haze. I kept my phone within arm's reach, but the silence was deafening. I hadn't expected them to respond quickly, but the emptiness that came with waiting for any kind of acknowledgement, felt unbearable. The house was quieter than usual, and I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling of having made an irreversible decision. I kept second-guessing myself, wondering if I had made the right call or if I was closing a door on something that might have brought closure. On June 21, 2020, nearly 4 days after I had sent the email, I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping my coffee, when the notification popped up. It was from Steve. My heart skipped a beat, and I immediately clicked it open. Daniel, the email began, "We received your response, and we want you to know that we understand your decision. We made a terrible mistake all those years ago, and we realize that no apology can undo what we've done to you. I can't speak for Monica, but I want you to know that I am deeply sorry. I didn't ask for your forgiveness, and I don't expect it. But I do ask that you know that I've spent my life thinking about the decision I made. Your sister, Emily, understands why you can't help, and I will never try to contact you again unless you decide otherwise." There was more, but I stopped reading right there. The apology was long overdue, but somehow, it didn't feel real. After all this time, after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with this. He acknowledged everything I had said, everything I had felt, but the reality was that it felt too little, too late. Could I trust his words now? Could I ever? I read it again, and then a third time, as if the words would magically shift, as if something would finally click and make sense of everything. But nothing did. It was just more words, more empty promises from a man who had already made the decision to abandon me once. The guilt, the shame, it was all still there, festering beneath the surface. For a while, I didn't respond. I couldn't. Part of me wanted to just forget this all and move on. I had made my choice, and yet I felt unsettled. It wasn't the apology I had been hoping for, it wasn't even close. The years of feeling like an afterthought, the hurt that had lingered beneath the surface, couldn't be undone with a single email. But I did eventually reply. I didn't know why, but something in me wanted to get it all off my chest. I wanted him to know how it felt to be treated like I was disposable. So, on June 23, 2020, I sent my response. I kept it short, direct, but full of the honesty I had held back for so long. Steve. Your apology doesn't change anything. You gave me up because I was a boy. You chose not to raise me. I can't just forget that. What happened, happened. I don't need an apology, and I don't need closure. But I'm not helping you. I've made peace with my life, and I've learned to live without you. Don't contact me again. After hitting send, I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't satisfied either. The act of writing the response didn't bring me peace, and nothing about it felt freeing. I had done it, but it didn't undo the years of abandonment. It didn't take away the pain. A few hours later, I closed my laptop, put my phone down, and went for a walk. The night was warm, the air thick with the lingering smell of summer. As I walked through the streets, I tried to let go of the weight I'd been carrying. Maybe I wasn't going to get the answers I wanted. Maybe some questions didn't need answers. But one thing was clear, I had made my choice. And I wasn't going back. I walked in silence, with the only sound being my footsteps and the hum of distant traffic. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of the past dragging me down.